You're probably collecting mountains of audit logs and activity data across Microsoft 365. Is it actually helping you detect insider threats? In this video, Elina from Threatscape, she's going to be joining me to go deeper on insider risk management in Purview. We're going to review tons of settings and then make sure you set it up the right way. So let's get going. Okay, Elina, so where do I get started setting up insider risk management? What kind of stuff do I need to have as a prerequisite to get the ball rolling?
Great question. Well, first of all, you just need to make sure that you do have your devices onboarded to Microsoft Purview. So as we all know, I think at this stage, Microsoft Purview, or specifically that data loss and insider risk management component of Microsoft Purview, that uses the same agent as the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. So if you are using Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, or MDE as we call it, you're kind of good to go. There's only one single setting that you need to enable within the Purview admin center. Other than that, if you are using a third-party anti-malware software, you will unfortunately need to onboard your devices to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint in a passive mode and then bring them over to Microsoft Purview. Another prerequisite that you cannot skip is that if your users are using any non-native browsers, such as anything other than Microsoft Edge, like Google Chrome or Firefox, you would need to deploy what we call a Microsoft Purview extension for those browsers, just to make sure that you get a full visibility and full coverage over what the users are actually doing within those browsers as well. So once you have those two prerequisites covered,
do that using Intune, stuff like that, right? That's not going to be a problem. Just push it out for everyone.
Correct. Yeah, you can do it from within Intune.
Cool. Okay. After I got all that up and running, is there anything else I need to kind of have set up in the background? Like we've previously done videos on sensitivity labels. If I've never touched Purview before, do I need to go away and set those up?
So a really good thing to do before you go and actually set up your insider risk management policies is to go through the global insider risk management settings. So this is where you add specific detective or detection groups or global exclusions, kind of anything that you can think of for those specific scenarios that you and your organization wants to cover. Another, I suppose, example is that if you want to use specific template for setting up your policy and you want to utilize something like a HR connector, there would be some additional steps that you need to cover within Entra ID as well, but we can kind of go through that as well.
Okay, so the labeling, that classification, that stuff's useful, but it's not gonna be a roadblock if I'm not there yet.
Absolutely, yeah. So you can utilize it within your policy, but it's not a must. So it's not one of the prerequisites.
Okay, so I guess that leads me on to, you mentioned global settings and things like that, right? This is going to apply tenant-wide? What's the whole deal behind these global settings and insider risk management?
Yeah, so you only set them up really once, or you can go back and modify them whenever you need something new to be set up, but you set them up at that tenant level. So whatever you set up here can then be utilized within your policy. So they're not kind of set in stone. So you can have some of the groups, for example, configured, but it's not to say that you have to use them within every single policy that you are then going to go and create. They're just there for you to kind of grab them whenever you want to utilize them within policies.
Cool. Well, do you want to... I haven't touched IRM for quite a long time. Do you want to like hold my hand through here? Like, what are the key things we need to set up? Is there any nuance, like from environment to environment, right? Or is this kind of going to be cookie cutter across everyone? Or is everyone's tenant going to look a little bit different with regards to these settings?
Well, the main thing that I always tell my customers, and the way that I recommend that they do this, is that they go through all the global insider risk settings, right? And they kind of decide what would fit most their own organization. So the baseline, I suppose, could be the same for everyone at that tenant level. However, it's all down to you and your organization, how granular you want to go in terms of those settings that you are willing to set up. And what are some of those specific requirements that you might have for your own business, right? So we're kind of going to be throwing a couple of examples at you guys once we are going through some of the specific settings to give you a little bit more visibility and a couple of examples to help you better understand what is actually possible within in-service management as well.
So I'll tell you what, let's get the ball rolling then and run through some of these settings. Okay, inside risk management, so analytics, let's start from the top and work our way down so we can understand the most important ones here.
Sure.
I guess
And before
sounds
I
like
do that as well,
important stuff.
absolutely, 100%. And before I do that as well, just for anyone that might not be that familiar with the new unified Microsoft Purview portal, the way that you find these settings is if you navigate over to purview.microsoft.com, then you go over to settings and then in-service management. If you cannot locate them over here, because maybe you haven't been here before, and some of the solutions might be pinned down in here, then there's another option over here in the top right when you go over to the toggle settings option and then go over and find in-service management as well. So this is how you get to this specific page. And this is something that you should go through before you actually go and create your in-service management policies.
Right. And so
Right.
when you head to just to clarify that, when you head to that settings page, this is the kind of global settings for all the different solutions. And then you go into the solution itself later on to go to a policy level. Is that the idea?
Correct.
Understood. Okay, cool. Right. Let's blow my mind and go through some of these settings. Get me up to speed.
Cool. Okay, so the first one at the top is analytics, right? So again, this is kind of a no-brainer thing, right? But you just need to make sure that you do enable that. So there are a couple of different toggle ons here that you need to make sure that you've got them enabled, right? So this is quite new. There used to be just one, but now you've got show insights at the tenant level and show insights at a user level option. So again, I would just recommend that you've got both of those options enabled so you can actually get those insights for both of those scenarios as well. Okay, next one that we've got is the data sharing, right? So there are two main options in here. First one is the export alert details to SIEM services. So this is where you can integrate in-service management with other maybe third-party solutions through API connectors, right? So once you toggle this on, you will then have an option to avail of those different connectors between different solutions that you and your organization might be using. The bottom option here is to share user risk details with other security solutions. So again, this is something that you would need to enable if you wish to bring over, for example, data from information protection or data loss prevention, or if you wish to utilize something within in-service management called adaptive protection for the dynamic user behavior management, where you can use in-service management in conjunction with, for example, conditional access within Entra ID, right? So again, toggle this on if you are willing to use other security solutions and gain those insights from other products within either Microsoft Purview or the entire Microsoft 365 stack as well.
So I guess to clarify that, when you say the other 365 stack, this setting is what's going to drive stuff through to Defender XDR and let me join up all those tables and join up those incidents.
Correct. So if you wish that your security team manages all the different incidents and alerts coming from both Defender and Microsoft Purview, by enabling this single toggle, you are essentially bringing them over to the security admin center. So then you don't really have to worry about who's got permissions to the security admin center and who's got permissions to the Purview admin center. You can have them within that unified portal and manage all the different incidents and alerts from within that one centralized.
Great.
So next option that we've got here are the detection groups.
Great.
So we've got a few options in here, and if you're jumping into here for the very first time, it will probably take about a minute or so to load one of the default domain groups that Microsoft kind of creates for you, which is the free public domains, right? So this is a list of the likes of Gmails, Yahoo, all that kind of stuff. So again, as the name says, free public domains, and Microsoft kind of curates that list and Microsoft manages that list. And this is the list that you can then use within your in-service management policies. But of course, you have an option to set up your own custom domain group. So to give you a couple of examples, guys, for example, let's say if I am working with auditors, right, and I don't want to specifically for any sensitive emails going out to auditors or maybe sensitive files being shared with auditors, I don't really want that email or that file to be treated in the same way as possibly someone doing definitely something risky within my organization. So the reason for creating this specific group would be that maybe I want to just ignore all that communication going on for the duration of my audit. So I'm kind of creating this as a temporary measure. Another example could be that specifically, maybe you might have a use case that you want to block Russian domains or Chinese domains and so on. So you can upload your own list of different domains that you do not wish your users to be communicating with. And then another example could be that you might have a business partner. There could be a sister company where that transfer of sensitive data happens on a daily basis. So you don't want this to be flagged every single time that this happens. So again, a few different examples for you guys to kind of know what is possible within this specific setting here.
And so I guess, we've got all these different groups and its domains, its file paths, its file names. Just to solidify my understanding of it then, it's basically going to allow me to either create exclusions or on the other side of the fence to increase the kind of severity of the incident, right? So I might have an exclusion for a domain group and it's, hey, maybe it's all the other companies I work with, maybe that aren't in my tenant, right? And I need to kind of allow list those domains. But similarly, hey, competitor domains, free public domains, risky geographies, stuff like that. This setting controls two different dynamics.
Correct. And obviously this allows a little bit more of a granularity because as we all know, some of the settings out of the box or some of the policies out of the box, they do tend to generate a lot of false positives. And when I go and set up inside a risk management policy, I want to make sure that I minimize that number as much as possible. So a really good example that we're going to cover in just a minute as well is one of the office indicators that talks about sending an email to someone outside of the organization, right? For the likes of maybe salespeople or, kind of anyone really within the finance department as well when they are sending out invoices or any stuff like that, right? Well, for most part of it, every single email that they would be sending that would go somewhere outside of the organization, right? But does it mean that it's risky? Not necessarily. So maybe I just want to limit that specific option that, okay, if it's an email going outside of my organization, only pay special attention to the email if it's on a free public domain like the likes of Gmail or Yahoo and so on. And maybe ignore or assign a different type of a risk or a different type of a score if it's an email going out to another Microsoft managed domain or maybe something on a Google Workspace platform and so on.
Okay. So same idea going across all these types. We probably don't need to run through all of those. What's next on our kind of list of global settings that we got to review?
Sure. Maybe just one more detection group that I want to kind of cover for the sensitive information types, because I know this is something that a lot of the users kind of struggle with as well. And this can be a little bit of a headache when teams kind of try to manage that sort of stuff from either within inside of risk management or even within Microsoft information protection as well. So again, just as we said, there are a lot of sensitive information types or any other type of a classifier within Microsoft information protection that can cause a lot of false positives because, again, they could be based on a pattern or a regular expression, or they could be just based around something being of a low confidence, right? So you just want to make sure that you limit the amount of false positives. So in this specific case, you might just put them into a group, all those sensitive information types that come out of the box that generate a lot of noise within your tenant, right? And you can, for example, come up with a group called false positive generators, or maybe you're within a specific industry, could be healthcare, could be, university, education, and so on. So maybe you do have a number of specific classifiers that kind of you reuse within every single policy that you set up. So to save yourself a little bit of time, you can just group them into those sensitive information types groups under the detection groups as well. So we can see some of the examples in here: medical and diseases, credential-related sensitive information types, GDPR or personally identifiable information, financial, physical addresses. You kind of get the idea here, right?
Yep.
Great.
Making it less noisy. That's kind of one of the core recurring themes here. Understood.
Absolutely. So once you have these configured, and again, we would recommend that you kind of go into each one of them and decide for yourself whether it is something that you want to avail of or whether that's fine with, you're happy enough with what's in here as default. But once you have them set up, you are now in a position to go and configure your global exclusions. So the first thing we've got here are domains. Again, you can either put in individual domains or group domains. I probably wouldn't recommend excluding any specific domains, maybe only as a temporary measure if you need to, but other than that, I would definitely want to have that full visibility into what's actually going in and going out of my organization, what way are the users communicating, and what's going on with that transfer of sensitive data as well. The second one here is definitely something that I would recommend that you guys enable. So this is the email signature attachments. And again, kind of that's what it says on the tin. So it ignores the email signature attachment. So sometimes you might be sending back an empty email, or maybe you might be just putting a single word or whatever. But for whatever reason, your signature, your email signature gets attached as an attachment rather than just being in the body of an email. And again, most of our signatures would consist of some full names or maybe address of the business, phone number, and so on. So you just want to make sure that this is not perceived as something sensitive. And again, just to minimize the number of false positives, this is a good feature to have enabled as well. Also, remember how we said that you've got sensitive information types that perhaps generate a lot of noise for your organization. After you configure your detection groups in the step before this, you can now go and add them as a global exclusion. So let's say if you've got a group for false positive generators and you just want to make sure that the stuff that contains those false positive generators, I can give you a couple of examples that I see in every tenant that I would get access to, the likes of New Zealand social welfare number or the Portugal tax identification number. These are the stuff that comes out of the box. These are the stuff that are kind of around low confidence and different patterns that again generate a lot of noise. You can now use that detection group that you configured in the previous step and put it down as a global exclusion, which means that these types of classifiers are going to be ignored within your policies. So again, only do it with the ones that you definitely want to ignore.
So when we say it's applying globally and it excludes that classifier globally, we mean globally, right? I can't have a per policy override for that exclusion, or can I?
No, unfortunately, no.
Okay.
So again, if you don't
Makes
kind of
sense.
want to exclude it at the global level, you just use your detection groups, right? So don't put anything in here under the global exclusions, but have them configured within the detection group. So then you can decide within the policy itself whether you want to ignore them or whether you still want to keep them.
Makes sense.
So inline alert customization, again, that's what it says on the tin. You just decide which people assigned to which specific roles can edit policies and stuff like that. Next, we've got intelligent detections. Couple of things kind of to be aware of. We won't be diving into them specifically. However, if you try to minimize the number of false positives, but you still think that there's still too much noise kind of going on within incidents and alerts, maybe you just need to modify the minimum number of daily events that boost the score for unusual activity. So 55 is the default, but if you see that maybe it's either too low, too high, you have an option in here to customize this. The same with the alert volume. So out of the box, this is going to be set as the default, and then you can also modify it, fewer alerts or more alerts as well. Again, it's going to have an impact on the number of alerts being generated, but if you think you're getting too many or not enough, you can modify this single setting in here. Next option in here, again, if you want to fully integrate with Microsoft Defender for Endpoint and you're using different policy templates relating to MDE, you can also utilize the different alert statuses like unknown, new, in progress, resolved within Inside OS Management. And then the bottom option here, so two options actually, unallowed domains and third-party domains. So again, if you want to maybe specify what are some of the unallowed domains, like could be, I don't know, one of your main competitors, maybe you're dealing with intellectual property and you want to make sure that nothing is being exfiltrated, right? You can just put them down in here.
Great.
Or you can specify maybe specific cloud storage domains or any kind of third-party system that you might be using. So again, modern world is all about using the software as a service applications, right? So they would all be kind of hosted in the cloud. So if you use specific ones that you either want to allow or block, you can just utilize that list within the global insider risk management settings as well.
Great.
Understood.
Microsoft Teams, again, just worth mention, but probably not too big of a deal. So if you want to integrate Microsoft Teams in terms of having a specific Teams group and Teams channel created when you generate a case or there's some kind of an investigation going on in your organization, you can just enable the setting to have it automatically set up for you. Again, I don't really see this being used quite often, but that option is here for you. Notifications, again, as the name says on the tin, right? This is where you modify the notification. So this is where you decide whether you want to get an alert on daily basis, weekly basis, monthly email summarizing the events, and whether to send an email when analytics is turned off for your organization. So next one is the big one, right? So these are our policy indicators. So you do need to enable them because they wouldn't be enabled by default if you want to utilize some of these within your policies, right? So let me take you through some of these buttons, I suppose, that we can see here. So we'll cover them in a little bit more detail in just a second, but the GenAI application indicators are moving to a paid model. So if you want to use enterprise applications such as Chat GPT Enterprise Edition or maybe any other AI tool that you've set up as an enterprise app in Entra ID, this is no longer going to be just on a per user per month, but it's going into that consumption-based model. And same with any indicator relating to a cloud service, cloud storage, or Fabric indicators as well. You do have an option to avail of the default or the out-of-the-box indicators. So again, this is the stuff like downloading content from SharePoint, syncing content from SharePoint and OneDrive, to the kind of more complex ones, like, for example, downgrading sensitivity labels that would be applied to files or emails, deleting some of the stuff. You kind of get the idea, right? And then you kind of go down that list and it follows the same principle for device indicators, risky browsing indicators, and so on. You do have an option here to either create a custom indicator. So you kind of get to decide what is that user behavior that you want to watch or you want to utilize within your policies that wouldn't necessarily be on this list. But also you have an option to add a new indicator variant. So remember how we said that there's a specific Office indicator called sending email with attachments to recipients outside of the organization, right? It's not really perceived as risky because this is, again, normal kind of day-to-day business operation. However, if you want to go a step further and decide that, you know what, I'm not going to utilize it within my policy, but I still want to pay attention to that email that is being sent to a free public domain or maybe a Russian domain or maybe a Chinese domain, you now get an option based on the detection group that you've set up, right? So the free public domains comes out of the box and the Russian and the Chinese domains, these are the ones that were custom. So these were the ones that I set up within the settings, right? But now you have an option to go a step further and decide, okay, do you want to increase the
Yeah.
score of a risk score of a user when they do that specific activity, or whether you do want to ignore it as well. So again, gives you a little bit of granularity.
Question that comes to mind with stuff like that, and I guess a lot of these indicators, is where does the line start and stop between insider risk management and data loss prevention, right? Insofar as that kind of indicator sounds to me originally like something that you would want through DLP, even if it was just in audit mode, but potentially in block mode as well. Does this just kind of add an additional audit that then adds a risk score to it? Like, is that a fair representation?
Yeah, so what's really good about insider risk management and how it's different from data loss prevention is that if you use insider risk, you can now use it in conjunction with conditional access to help you automate that whole process a little bit as well. So it's not that, oh yeah, we're just going to stop that user from sending a sensitive email outside of the organization, but also we can block that user, we can revoke their access pending a review. And also, I think one of really good examples is the fact that within data loss prevention, at the moment, there is no option to upload like a CSV file, maybe with hundreds upon hundreds of different domains that you either want to block or maybe you want to mark them as safe. Whereas within insider risk management, you do have an option to upload a file, right? So you don't need to be typing in every single domain that you want to pay special attention to. So this is essentially how it's different. But you can, for example, use data loss prevention as your base for your policy as well. So it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be around a specific activity. You can base it around a specific DLP policy as well.
Gotcha. And then the other thing you mentioned there at the top was custom indicators. So you've got the out-the-box ones, and you can copy them and tweak them. Custom indicators, what's kind of involved in the setup of those?
Again, you just go through the setup and you decide whether you want to utilize a specific connector. So your custom indicator could be, I don't know, a promotion date of someone if you're pulling data from like a HR system, could be a resignation data, could be really anything that you can think of, to be honest. I haven't really found a customer that was willing kind of to utilize it because, again, the list of the out of the box is quite comprehensive, but it is there as an option for you guys.
Cool, good stuff. So where do we head from here?
So once you set them up, and again, the list kind of is quite long, and the one that we mentioned, for example, the Gen AI ones or the cloud storage indicators. So just be careful that some of these are falling under that category of going into the consumption-based model, right? So pay as you go, you're going to pay for the usage, but it will tell you here when you scroll down before you actually enable them. So again, once you have the policy indicators configured, you can then go and look at your policy timeframes, right? So two really key settings in here, activation window and past activity detection. So what is really, really good about insider risk management is that you can get the benefit from using the specific product straight away the minute that you actually enable that and start using it, because it actually acts retrospectively as well, right? So to give you an idea, if a user does something risky today, but I covered my prerequisites, like having the web browser extension pushed out to that user, and that device has been onboarded to MD, and as a result of that, a Microsoft Purview already, it can now go through a unified audit log and say, oh, hey, by the way, 10 days ago, this user also did something risky, even though you might not have had that insider risk management policy in place at that stage, but it's able to go back and look through the history of what that user did on their device, and it will be able to flag it, and then it can have it as part of the detection sequence. So if you have your policy configured in a way that risk score associated with a specific user is going to go up, the more risky activities they would have assigned to them, that will kind of help you determine how risky that a user is as well.
That's kind of neat then. So if I think of it like a scenario there, if the business comes to you and says, hey, we've had a certain individual hand in their notice, what can we do to make sure they don't screw us or something like that? even if I don't have insider risk management deployed when I'm asked that question, hey, I could just go away and turn it on now and at least get some kind of data historically, right, to find out if they were up to anything suspicious. Is that
Absolutely.
incident response would come into that as well? So you mentioned as well the Defender for Endpoint being onboarded, the extensions for the web browser being pushed out. If I haven't done that, can I at least get some of the data from things like SharePoint and email and stuff like that? Like, can I get a little bit of insider risk management, or do I need everything to get that data?
Great question. So yes, you can get some information from the cloud repositories, right? But when it comes to the activities specifically kind of responsible or within that device onboarding or the web browser activities kind of going on, then unfortunately you would need to have devices onboarded to Purview and that web browser extension pushed out. But, even with the activities kind of going on in the cloud, someone sending an email, someone downloading a file from SharePoint, syncing their entire OneDrive and all that, you will be able to see some of that activity at least. So it won't be like, oh, it's nothing because you haven't covered some of the prerequisites.
This one. Gotcha. Okay, cool. Right, let's crack on. What's next?
Cool. So Power Automate flows, again, it does what it says on the tin, right? You can just set up automate a little bit of automation here by using Power Automate. Then you've got a priority physical assets. So again, if you use specific maybe cards to get in and out of the buildings and stuff like that, or maybe server rooms, you kind of get the idea. You can set them up in here. And then we're getting down to the good stuff like priority user groups, right? So let me give you an example. There's a specific policy template within insider risk management designed specifically for data theft by department employees, right? So that kind of looks after that scenario of having a lever inside of your organization. But let's say that within your standard lever practice, or maybe the process that you have around them, you don't delete them, right? Or maybe you don't disable that account for a number of days or whatever. So by the time they leave the organization, it's kind of too late to pay that special attention to them, right? So maybe you wish to set up a lever priority user group, which then you can use within any other policy template, where you just say, okay, here's a list of my users that have handed in their notice, right? I want to watch them closely for the next 30, 60, 90 days or whatever, because there's a huge amount of risk around them. And I'm just afraid that they might just steal some corporate data, right? So this is just one example. Another example would be, for example, new staff members, right? They join the organization. You want to make sure that they actually abide by all the procedures and processes that you've got in place. So maybe within the first kind of couple of weeks of them joining your organization, you just want to make sure that you kind of watch them a little bit closer to make sure that you develop those good practices. Or maybe you've got a list of like VIPs or whatever, and you want to kind of put them into a group and base your policy around those users as well.
Understood.
One thing.
Sorry, just to clarify then, something like what that shouts out to me as, so if you have good use of maybe something like Entra identity governance and you've got a joiners, movers, leavers process, integrating that with this priority user group could be quite effective. Is that like a fair assumption?
Yeah. The only thing about those priority user groups is that unfortunately there's no kind of correlation between them sitting within the global insider risk settings and users kind of existing within Entra ID, insofar as you have to set up these groups in here. They're not directly connected to Entra ID groups. So
Gotcha.
when you are
Wow.
managing these groups, unfortunately, you cannot just say, oh, I'm going to create a dynamic user group with an Entra ID or anything like that. You unfortunately need to manage them manually from here, not even with an Entra.
Because that would be really cool if you could. But I get you now, right? So this is a purely insider risk management. I'm not even going to call it a group, container, right? An object that has users in it. Understood. Okay, cool. That makes sense.
There's still kind of nothing stopping you from having a group that would need to be mail enabled and licensed at that Microsoft 365 E5 level, right? Or similar, like A5 and so on. within Entra ID and then scoping your policy to that specific group of people as well. But again, a couple of different options how you can manage that. But just bringing that up that you can actually automate this thing here.
Right. So there's ways around it, but out the box, that's what you're looking at.
Yeah.
Great.
And then last but not least, like nearly every Purview solution, instead of risk management is no different and it's built with that privacy in mind, right? So you do have an option here to show pseudonymized versions of usernames if you don't want to show the full display name when you're doing the investigation piece. So again, just to protect the privacy of your users.
What's your experience in terms of what customers actually do there? Because I guess, I mean, geez, you could find out some really sensitive stuff, I guess, across all of Purview, all of Defender as well, really, is there's a trade-off to be made there. And what do you see most folks doing in the real world?
It's funny that you're asking because up until adaptive protection became this really popular thing, everyone was basically using the pseudonymized versions of username. But that kind of went out of the window because when you deal with adaptive protection, obviously, it's dynamically changing what the users have access to and what not. So unfortunately, when adaptive protection comes into that whole thing, when you do start to utilize it, you cannot pseudonymize versions of usernames anymore. So you will be just seeing the normal usernames and the display names and so on. So in the past, I would see,
right?
yeah. So in the past, I would have seen a lot of organizations just showing those pseudonymized versions of names to protect the privacy of the users. But now to be able to do a proper investigation and use adaptive protection, that's kind of no longer an option. So even though you might have this set up as, use the pseudonymized usernames, when you go to enter, or when you go to view the audit logs, or when you go and actually view inside risk management and say, oh, this user has got an elevated risk level, you're still gonna end up seeing who that user was. So just something to keep in mind.
Okay. So I guess, I mean, I'm looking at the list there. That looks kind of like we've explored all those global insider risk management settings. What happens next? So, hey, I know what insider risk management is. I've configured what looks like the baseline settings. How do I? What's the next thing an admin should do to get some protection out of this?
Sure. So the next thing is then you are now ready to go and create your insider risk management policies.
Okay. Let's go
So
for
we're going to navigate over to solutions. And then insider risk management and policies. So you will notice that I've got a couple of policies set up in here. So we'll just take you through one of them, which is specifically the one that I wish to utilize within adaptive protection. So I want to use it in conjunction with conditional access, which we're going to show you as well. So again, first thing you will notice when you set up a new kind of policy is that you will be presented with a policy template. Right? This a bad example to show you. Let me just go back and start a new custom policy and we'll just cancel in a second.
Okay, so this is going to show me all the kind of insider risk management levels of protection that are available just out the box. Microsoft have predetermined this as a good type of defense to have. Is that right?
Correct. So you cannot actually bypass this specific step within the wizard, right? You do need to go with some sort of a policy template on which you're going to base your policy, right? So again, the data type by the partnering users, you will also notice that the policy itself and the way that it's laid out, it's going to tell you what prerequisites you do need to have in place to be able to fully utilize it. So it won't actually let you go a step further or whatever if you haven't actually fulfilled all the requirements. If it's something that is recommended but it's not a must, it will just show you that it's optional or a recommended option, right? So we can see in our case, we've got devices onboarded here. We've got some cloud applications that we've connected and so on. So again, it will also tell you what is the triggering event, what are some of the activities detected, and that will be included. and you kind of can go through that list, right? So again, just to quickly give you an overview of what is available in here. So data type by department employees for your leavers, so the users that have handed in their notice. Then we've got data leaks. So data leaks would be, again, you can utilize a data loss prevention policy in here.
Great.
You can set it up by the risky users or by priority users as well. Risky AI usage, that's quite useful because you can now use this specific policy within a data security posture management as well. So it's just going to ingest the logs generated by insider risk management, and it's going to kind of present you in a way where you can go and filter AI activities and see what prompts your users are using
Great.
when they go and ask Copilot or a ChatGPT Enterprise and so on. And what
Oh,
are
so
some of those responses?
that's not just relying on Copilot, which you kind of assume would be supported out the box. That's using ChatGPT, so you get kind of connectors to connect into Purview for these different kind of Gen AI apps.
Correct. So remember how when we are going through the global insider risk settings, there are different indicators that you can utilize then within your policies. And I did mention the fact that, for example, the Gen AI indicators are now moving from the per user per month subscription basis to a consumption based model, right? But if you use an enterprise version of a Gen AI tool and you have got it set up maybe within like an app registration or enterprise app in Entra ID, you can now connect them and fully integrate them. So you can pull those logs from those Gen AI tools and also see, what prompts are the users using and what prompts are they presented with as well in their responses.
Oh, good grief! Don't connect my ChatGPT account to that. That would reveal all sorts of terrible, my deepest darkest thought. Anywho, okay, so
Wow.
really a whole bunch of kind of comprehensive templates here, I guess. What are the most common ones you see? Like, what's typically the starting point for most customers? Because I know you do a ton of these with the kind of the Threatscape Purview implementation service and all that kind of stuff. So if a customer has to start with one, what's that one? And can you talk us through it?
So data leaks for sure. So, and it's the template that I based my policy relating to the adaptive protection as well. So we'll go through, what is possible in there. You don't really need like a massive amount of prerequisites to be covered with it, and you can even utilize data loss prevention as your kind of basis for that policies as well. So we'll go through that whole setup. So let me just cancel out of it. Again, these are all the examples that you can base your policies on, but the one that we've got set up is the data leaks template, and it's the one that I'm going to be using for adaptive protection as well. So I'm going to just go edit. So again, first step is always going to be selecting the policy template. Then I go next. I need to put in a name and a description. So you will notice that I'm going back to edit an existing policy, and as with nearly all things Purview related, you cannot go back and modify the name of it. So, once you make a mistake, there's a typo or whatever, you will need to create it from scratch or duplicate it and rename it, that kind of thing, right? So again, name it.
Yeah, that drives me absolutely mad. I have to put it out there. I just always annoys me that
I
you
agree.
also don't set the name at the end of it. I feel like you should set the name at the end of it because that's after you've built it and you've got a better idea of what it's going to be about. Anywho, that's a rant for a different video. Let's march on.
I like to use naming conventions as well. So again, we do a lot of work around conditional access for zero trust, and when we develop our baseline, we work on that framework that Microsoft is also recommended as well, and I quite like it. And now I'll tell you now the reason why I like it as well, using different naming conventions, is not only for the ease of just by looking at it, I know what this is all about. I know what users are within the scope of it. I know what policy template was in use. But now when you think about the fact that we're going to be using, for example, the security admin center to manage all the different alerts and incidents being generated from within Defender, but now from within Purview as well, sometimes it's not that easy to be able to determine, actually, what specific product or solution is this alert directly coming from, right? So if I use DLP, I'm going to know that it's a data loss prevention alert. If I use IRM, I'm going to know that it's an insider risk management alert as well. So this is kind of my reason for doing it that way.
Getcha. It makes sense. And that's actually a good plug because Nathan Hutchison, security MVP, and I just recorded, may or may not be live at the time of this video going out, a video on conditional access and our frameworks and all that kind of stuff. So folks watching, if you want to learn about some really cool stuff in conditional access, make sure you check out our channel and watch those videos. Anywho, I'm doing the YouTube thing where you got to plug all your content.
Sweet.
Admin units.
I will
I'll talk
definitely be
about-
watching, by the way.
Yeah.
I love all the
Love it.
videos you guys are creating.
Love it.
So yeah.
So yeah, admin units talk about stuff that nobody ever uses.
Great.
I guess this is going to make it so that insider risk management can only apply to certain AUs if I set the policy for that. Is that what we're doing here?
Correct. Yeah. So you can utilize admin units within different solutions within kind of Microsoft 365 stack. Just be careful that some of the specific products do not support them at the moment. I don't know what it's to say that they are going to be supported in the future, but just be careful when you are creating that. It might be available within insider risk, but might not be available, let's say, within, I don't know, information protection or something like that. So just check out the documents before you go and use them.
And I also notice on the screen there, it says created in Azure Active Directory. And we are recording this in 2025 and it's over in Azure AD. Wow.
That's it.
Cool. Okay, right. What's up next?
So we don't have any admin units here. We don't want to utilize them. So in the next step, we just specify the users that we want to utilize. So you either go for all users or specific users. Just be careful that even if you scope it to all users, insider risk management is one of those solutions that is licensed per user, right? So every single user that is supposed to be within the scope of your policy, they need that E5 license assigned to them. It's going to basically ignore all the users that wouldn't have that specific license assigned to them, even though you might go all users.
Right. Okay. Interesting. So it's just to clarify that, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but because some things in 365 just kind of work for everyone. If you've got one license and a tenant, right? This is going to do an actual check at the user profile to see if I have a license.
Correct. And in most cases, you're going to see it when you then go and view your policy list. Because after, you create it, you wait for a couple of hours or whatever, you wait for those analytics to run through and everything to kind of propagate on the back end. And then once you start seeing some of the alerts being generated, it will tell you exactly the number of users that are within the scope of that policy as well.
Alrighty.
So content to prioritize, again, you get to decide whether you want to maybe focus on specific SharePoint site that is super sensitive, or maybe a specific group of sensitive information types. So in my case, I don't want to do it, but that option is in here. The way you would do it is you would just check this option in here and then select whatever one you want to kind of go for, right? So if I have that group on, I don't know, GDPR or PII related sensitive information types, I'll just be able to check this option in here, and within the next step in the wizard, I will be able to add that specific group. So again, this is the argument or the reason behind using those groupings of different classifiers, so you don't need to add them individually within a policy. So I'm going to go next again. And over here, remember how I said that your triggering event for a policy doesn't necessarily need to be a user performing a specific exfiltration activity, right? So if you have a DLP in place, you can just base your whole policy with an insider risk on that. I'm not going to do it in this case, but it's an option here for you. So exfiltration activities, again, these are kind of similar to the office indicators, but they're not the same, right? So over here, you just decide what is going to be that activity that is going to trigger the system to generate an alert for you and kind of raise those flags, right? So again, you can go through that list yourself and decide which ones are the ones that you want to focus on. I'm going to, for example, select that send an email with attachment to recipients outside of the organization. And within the next step, I'm actually going to go more granular within that specific indicator, where I'm going to say, actually, ignore the ones that are just sent to anyone outside of the organization, only show me the ones that are sent outside of the organization, but only to maybe free public domains or a Chinese domain, so on, right? But you kind of get the idea. So you can go through this list and just decide which ones you want to select. I suppose when you are only starting your journey with Purview on insider risk management in general, you probably wouldn't have too much idea about what could be that exfiltration trigger. So, there's no kind of harm selecting all the different options in here as well. So I'm going to go next. And over here, you've got an option to modify the thresholds for triggering events. I'm going to go with the recommended option, but you do have an option here to utilize and use your own kind of threshold. So the list kind of is quite long, and you need to do it and modify it and customize every single one of them if you really want to go with what kind of fits your organization. But again, those options are here for you. So you just need to decide, what is the number of activities for, I don't know, for like a low, medium, high, per day and so on.
So
Again,
I
I'm going to
guess
stick with.
just to clarify then, so the reason that folks might, so you create up a policy, you probably use the defaults to start with. You're jumping back into the policy maybe later on to make settings to that if you're kind of noticing too many false positives, a lot of noise. That's the kind of the basis of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you want to know for sure, like from the get-go, it's only when you start seeing some alerts and incidents being generated that you might just be like, actually, maybe those thresholds are too low, too high. Let me go back and change it.
Understood.
And then the next step is where we choose the different indicators that we want to utilize within the policy. So if you remember, I did have some indicator variants that I set up based on my detection groups that I then customize and so on. So we are able to see them that if you've got that base indicator that you then went and customized with your indicator variant, it will just tell you that in the brackets, kind of in bold as well, what is your base and then what is your variant as well. So over here, you now have an option that maybe you want to uncheck the base one and you want to ignore it and you only want to focus on the variant one that you set up. If I scroll down and look for that specific use case of sending email with attachments to recipients outside of the organization, what I can do now is that I'm going to uncheck, or I have it unchecked already, but if I was creating that from scratch, I would just uncheck the base indicator and just select on the variant ones, right? So if it's sent to maybe one of my business partners, right? They are outside of the organization, but they're not on a free public domain. I want to just ignore it, right? Don't generate an incident or an alert in that case, but just focus on that sensitive email attachment is going to a free public domain or a Russian or a Chinese domain as well. Email.
Understood.
And you kind of get the idea. You can do it for all the other indicators as well. When I click next, I now have the detection options, right? So for sequence detection, if my users are doing some risky activities, but maybe they're splitting it or doing it over the entire week or an entire month and stuff like that. Well, I still want to know about it, right? I want to know what specific activities they carried out in a specific sequence, right? One of the kind of popular one is the ones to do with sensitivity labels. So if you've got labels in place, maybe there are some protective mechanisms in place for highly confidential or confidential labels, right? But if someone is clever enough, they might know that, actually there are ways to bypass that protective mechanisms, right? So maybe they want to downgrade or remove that label, then they download it, obfuscate it, then exfiltrate it, right? So these are kind of the common one that I would see a lot of organizations kind of utilizing within their policies as well. And these are definitely really good ones to have as well.
That's cool.
But again,
that's cool. So it's figuring out ways that folks might, it's defense evasion fundamentally, right? And then it's kind of including those types of risks in its overall calculation for the risk.
Absolutely, yeah. And the more of those activities that they perform in a sequence over, that period of time. So again, we kind of go back to that past activity detection options within global risk settings as well. So it's going to kind of go back those 30 days or 90 days or 30 days into the future as well from that first triggering event and kind of see whether they perform those series of activities in a specific sequence as well. And the more they do it, obviously the risk score of a specific user will then go up. And then at the bottom of the list, you now have those two options as well. Cumulative exfiltration activities and the risk score boosters as well. So again, this is kind of to help you with that kind of dynamic or automatic ways to deal with users kind of doing that exfiltration, right? So you can just automatically detect when a user's exfiltration activities exceed norms. So for example, user A, it's quite normal for them to download 5 files a day and send 10 emails a day. But if they suddenly start downloading hundreds upon hundreds of files and then sending maybe thousands of emails a day, that's going to kind of raise some flags in the system. The same with the risk score booster. So activity, if it's above a user's usual activity for that day, then it's just going to tell you, oh, hey, this is exceeding this specific user's norm. So maybe just have a look at what's going on. So next, this is where you go and kind of do the same process that we've seen before within those triggering events, where you get an option to choose your thresholds for different types of indicators, right? Couple of options in here. So you can apply thresholds provided by Microsoft. So again, no need to customize it in here when you go for that option. Once you wait for that first kind of analytics scan to take place, and once it's kind of ready and it's propagated, it's gone through all the users, you will then be able to use this specific option in the middle, which is the recommended option. So apply thresholds specific to your user's activity. Again, if you don't see it available in here, or if it's grayed out, it's just that the first kind of analytics scan hasn't actually completed just yet. So it kind of needs to know what is the normal activity number for the day or for the week or whatever for a specific user to be actually able to modify those thresholds for each one of the users within the scope as well. So it's a really good option to have. And then if you want to, you do have an option to choose your own thresholds as well. So again, you will just need to go through that really long list and decide, what is the number of activities for a low severity alert, or for the medium, or for high, and so on. And you would need to do it for each one of those activities. So there's quite a lot on this list, but again, kind of going with the threshold specific to your user's activity might be a really good starting point for you and your organization. So once you have that done, you then go next. You review all the settings for your policy. So just make sure that the policies, the name is correct, users within the scope are correct, and so on. And then you just go and submit it.
I guess after you hit that submit button, the elephant in the room, you're turning something on in Purview. How long is this going to take to kick in? Do I go away and make a cup of coffee, or do I come back next week?
Yeah, like nearly everything within Purview. Well, it's kind of getting better, right? There are ways that Microsoft is currently working on it, but this is going to be no different than sensitivity labels. You need to wait for at least 24 hours to see those policy matches, right? So you set it up one day and then you come back the next and kind of have a look at what's going on. And every single time that you make a change to a policy, this is going to be the case, right? So it's going to kind of reset that timer on it. So if you add a new user to the policy, if you decide to change a threshold, if you decide to change an activity or a specific, risk score or something within that policy, this timer will reset, and then you have to wait those 24 hours for that to finish. And when you set up that policy for the first time, you then have an option to decide whether you want to get any alerts when a new policy generates that first alert, or whether you want to get it when a high severity alert is generated, and so on. I'm just going to uncheck that option for now and just click done. So just to show you in here, see how this is just a policy that I've just created, or I've just updated, and the users in scope says basically 0, right? The reason for it is that 1, the policy hasn't actually propagated properly just yet, so I need to wait 24 hours at least. 2, maybe not all of the users within the scope have that E5 license assigned to them. And 3, maybe they just haven't actually done anything risky, So there hasn't been an alert generated for that specific user, so they wouldn't be kind of contained within that specific number.
Email.
Cool. And I guess on that point, so that as far
Email.
as the
Email.
setup goes, we're pretty much good to go now. You might want to refine it over time, but that's our baseline in place.
Email.
Correct. Yeah. So you might have noticed that I called it adaptive protection. So obviously I want to get Microsoft to kind of help me automate that process a little bit as well. So there are additional steps that you can use. You don't have to if you don't want to. Like when you're starting your journey with Purview or Insider Risk Management, you don't kind of need to utilize adaptive protection straight away. But for those users that may be a little bit more mature, or they've gone through the initial testing and they do want to try it, we're now quickly going to show you what you need to do to have this adaptive protection integrated or work in conjunction with Entra ID's conditional access.
Few thoughts kind of come to mind on the back of that. Number one, we could probably do an entire video on adaptive protection, right? Because the scope of it is it's not just unique to this. And I guess the other thought that comes to mind is the incident response of insider risk management, right? So what happens when that alert comes through? How can I investigate it? All that type of stuff. If folks are watching this, it'd be great to get comments, feedback in general. What do you want? Because we can absolutely deliver that type of content as well if folks are interested.
Email.
So that covers the setup, the architecture, I guess you could say.
Email.
Anything else fundamental to the setup of insider risk management that we need to cover today?
Nothing really that's kind of springs to mind. Again, you can use adaptive protection. There are a couple of more settings where you just need to modify, what would be perceived in your case as a minor, moderate, and elevated risk level. But other than that, you'll be good to go. You just need to wait for that first alert to be generated, and then you can either manage that from within Insider Risk Management itself, where you just go to alerts in here. Obviously, we won't have anything in here now, but if you went to it,
Email.
a list will then come up and you can manage those different alerts from within here or within the global insider risk management settings. If you decided that you wanted to share that user risk level with other security solutions, you then have an option to manage them from within the security admin center.
Email.
Cool. Okay.
But again,
so a little
let
bit of
us
a
know in the
sampling there.
comments if it's something that you guys would be interested in seeing.
Okay. Yeah, we could definitely do a whole deep dive on that. Okay.
Email.
Excellent. Well, listen, Elina, that's been really, really useful. Folks, if you find content like this useful, make sure that you check out the rest of our YouTube channel. We get tons of cool stuff coming out on Purview Conditional Access, including common themes like top 5 mistakes that folks make in Microsoft 365 security. So check it out. Elina, thank you.